Welcome to Diversity Conversations, where we engage in thought-provoking dialogue to identify leadership solutions to today's most challenging conflicts. Stream live each week, Saturday 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Hosted by Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist and CEOs Eric Ellis and Tommy Lewis. Join us and add your voice to this engaging diversity conversation.
Good morning, Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, the United States, and the world. My name is Eric Ellis, and I'm the president and CEO of Integrity Development Corporation. And I'm joined this morning by my good friend and brother,
Tommy Lewis, president and CEO of Make It Plain Consulting. Good morning, Eric. Good morning.
Good morning, Tommy. How are you, my friend?
I'm well. I'm glad to be back in the seat. Glad to be with you again and our community. It's been a adventurous last couple of weeks, but I'm glad to be back with you.
Man, I'm so glad to have you here. It's like I can't really do it without you. I really enjoy our conversation. We are blessed to be able to talk to each other. Our pre-show warm-up is a blessing. The life lessons that you and I continue to experience are a blessing as well, man. So I'm just grateful. And we always start. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about wars and sort of the kinds of the escalation from individual conflict to cultural conflict to almost gang warfare and terrorist acts, then war. And look at what are some of the factors that drive that, because we all woke up today and saw that Palestine, some Palestinians had so basically declared war on Israel and have come in three different ways, through air, to the ground. And it's on fire today. But they've been at each other, man, for, 100 years. And we see what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. And Tommy, there are other wars breaking out around the world. And we have the Republican Party that is at war right now. And the decisions that they make could send us deeper into nationalism and divisions for no other goal but intransigence. It's not about winning. It's just about war and intransigence. And if we get there, Tommy, that's not helpful for anybody. And it's so easy to step from these little steps to finding yourself in a civil war. And like I tell people all the time in training, that we are not as divided as we're told we are. But if you keep telling people they hate each other, they'll wake up and it'll be Israel and Palestine, and we won't understand why we get there. So that's why we want to get to that. But I'd like to start, Tommy, by just kind of talking about your week. If there are a couple of highlights or events, man, that you want to share with our community, we're excited to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. And I like the topic for today. And so it reflects on my past week or two. And in my professional life, my job is to help individuals and organizations kind of weather the seasons of conflict.
Yeah.
Right. Towards some sense of normalcy, whatever that looks like, towards some sense of collaboration, unification, as well as solution. That's my job. That's my life.
That's right.
So in the last week, I have been in different states, being invited with our current clients. And with one of our clients, we've been working with them, Eric, for about 3 years. In the first 6 to 12 months, we went through a forming and norming phase. We were just forming together, really level setting of the 30 or 40 people who are part of this coalition of staff, students, in this case, community members, activists, and advocates. And so it took us a little while, meeting once a month, to come together to allow some people who were emotionally charged to really level set with those who are almost culturally insensitive. They simply did not understand why the other side was so emotional.
Right.
So we had to work through that balance. So we fast forward to last week. We are moving and pumping on all cylinders, Eric. We have gotten to a place where we have a couple to maybe a few new members, which we wanted. And this past week, a new member had joined and not really been a part of the process over the last 3 to 4 years. And so we tried to engage them early,
Right.
but they were offended by some things that were said, and what was said, in my opinion, were things that we've gotten to a place of transparency and honesty.
Right.
So speak your truth. Don't take it personal.
Right.
Through the process to
Right.
change the culture.
Right.
But what we want you to do is speak your truth. Right. Here's what I'm experiencing. So one person shared what they were experiencing, right? And another person took offense to that.
Yeah.
So they commenced in the person that was offended approached me. I shared my ear first, and then I share some insights to invite them back, right? This is the second time. We've been at this for 3 to 4 years. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that person didn't receive it well, and decided, I'm not coming back, and put out a kind of a manifesto. And so to put a bow around my week in this story is that two things, maybe even more, but two things. One, Eric, I never really always know where people are coming from, what their historical biography is. Right. I don't know. I don't always know their why.
Right.
And so I have to try to get to that point. The second is I still do all that I do through the lens of love.
It's right, Tommy.
I do.
That's it, man. It's the only way to make it.
The only way to make it. And so I am going to be returning back to the client. I've been a part of a number of emails, and I haven't responded to everything.
Right.
Because sometimes, in closing, that's what love is, Eric. Love is not always talking. Love is presence and action.
Right.
And so just listening, right, where other people are reacting, oh, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have taken it that way. No, just hear them, because they said that they were not heard during the time. So don't overtalk them. Just hear them and listen. And so that's part of the individual kind of dismantlement of that friction and conflict, such that it doesn't bleed into a war. So we have to take care of self before we address the world.
That's right, Tommy. Love that. So I'm going to share two stories from last week. One from a personal, I enjoy discount shopping. So I'm out of town with a client. I go into one of my favorite stores, Ross Dress for Less. And I'm trying to return a jacket or something. And so I said, I think I got my receipt. It's in the bag here somewhere, but I couldn't find it. And so she looked at me and she said, well, we're not going to be able to take that back. But I shop at Ross all the time, so I know their policies. I don't have to have a receipt. The tag is there. They generally check your license. And so she was really going off on me and saying, I'm not going to take that back. I said, well, lady, I know you all's policies. And then she started over talking me, Tommy. And you know how we say that on my good days, I do it this way. But on my bad days, I might come back at you. And in my older age, I have been so grateful to not usually react when people do crazy things and rude things. But then all of a sudden, the woman in the line, just a regular old, shopper, started yelling at me as well. So now the manager's yelling at me and she's yelling at me, and I'm giving both of them the business. And then all of a sudden I looked down and there was my receipt. And then I showed it to her. and then all the color left out of her face. And she apologized. And I looked at the woman there. And then, Tommy, when I left with my little refund, I got in the car. And then embarrassment kicked in. What were you doing? Why did you go there? It doesn't matter that you won, you lost.
Wow.
And and Tommy, I was actually just too embarrassed to even tell anybody in my family.
Yeah.
Even though I was right. It didn't matter, Tommy, because I didn't like the guy the way that I showed up, man. And just sometimes, man, it's easy to celebrate the victories and when you do the right thing, but it is embarrassing.
Yeah.
But you have to realize that we join humanity as having feet of clay. And people could tell me all day I was justified and look, you got vindicated. No, I don't like the way that I showed up. And then the second one is, I told you I was working with a client last week, Louisville Water, doing training all week. And a lot of people, because of this climate, people are dreading diversity training. And so several employees I heard that they had been in deep arguments with their supervisors, and I had a gentleman in one of my classes, they told me after the class that he had just almost cussed out his supervisor. And they said it was uncharacteristic for him to act like that. So now here he is in my class. So I'm starting off with the icebreaker. And so I got him in small groups. And I go to their table, nobody's doing anything. So I go to their table, I said, have you guys had your conversation around the icebreaker? Two of them, him, yes. One guy said, no, we haven't. I said, oh, okay, I see how we're going to do this. So I said, well, let me tell you guys a story. I said, when I was young, I was 16 years old, my father took me to my first job and he told me, Eric, I know you love to talk. I don't want you to embarrass the family. Make sure you're working. And so I told him, I've told you this story before. I told him, I said, look, I started off working pretty good. I said, but after a while, peer pressure kicked in. I said, they told me, my coworker said, look, when the supervisors leave, we make triple deckers, we make up sandwiches, and then we have somebody look out for the supervisor. So I said, okay, guys, so now here I am, peer pressure, making triple deckers, looking out the window for the supervisor and looking at the clock. Said, do you know how slow time moves when you're looking at the clock? I said, I was doubling my work days. So I abandoned that and said, man, I'm going back to work just because so the day can go faster. So I told him, I said, look, I don't care what you do. You can sit here all day and do nothing. I said, but I can tell you from experience, if you do that, this is going to go from a 3-hour workshop to 6.
Yeah.
We started laughing, man, and the guy got involved. And by the end of the session, he was coming up to me saying, man, I dreaded this, man. He said, I went off on my supervisor, but I really enjoyed this. And Tommy, that's what makes me grateful for the work that you and I do. And as I woke up and I saw the Palestinians had come in and started really war with Israel, I was reminded of the value of the work that you and I do, because any group of people can get there, Tommy. And the embers are burning right now around the world. And I don't care who thinks they can attack what you and I do. There is no credible opponent to diversity, respect, inclusion, equity, belonging, love. There is no credible opponent to what we do, Tommy. So just be encouraged, man. Stay the course. We're going to have this conversation so we can help our community recognize the value of what we're doing in our little worlds, in our little situations, how we deal with conflict within our families, how we deal with it within our communities, to the workplace, and ultimately nationally. We've got to really get a handle on that.
Yes, sir.
So, Tommy, as I looked at this, I was doing some research around what are the 7 factors that escalate us from individual conflict to nationalism, terrorist acts, and war. And it's a complex phenomenon that's influenced by various factors. We're going to talk about 7. I'll go through them. Community, feel free to weigh in at any point with your thoughts and input. But the first factor that can escalate these things is identity and belonging. A sense of identity and belonging to a particular group, whether it's based on nationality, ethnicity, religion, or ideology, can fuel individual conflict, foster nationalism, and motivate participation in terrorist acts of war. Tommy, talk about the risk of us being too caught up in our identity and belonging as a part of the group.
So the sense of belonging is psychological first. It is psychological and sociological. In other words, it begins with our own mind, that sense of belonging. It can be a feeling, it can be experience, but ultimately it can, when not well checked, lead to a dogma. It can lead to a narrow canon view, right? And so that's why that sense of belonging could be one uplifting for the individual. However, if it's, again, not checked, not monitored, if there's a charismatic leader or a charismatic group, then that sense of belonging turns into more or less an occult. It becomes a overwhelming sense or need of belonging to a concept, philosophy, or some type of psychology. And so this leads to, that's the individual that has the sense of belonging with the group. The group is in kind of group think, right? And more so, you can have a small group, for a short period of time.
Right.
But when that philosophy, Eric, transcends generations, then the original cause or original root of that psychology is not known.
Right.
It's just generation after generation after generation. And now we're further away from the original start of that philosophy or concept. But now I just believe what I do because I've been told, right? And so with that, a lot of national efforts or nationality is, for the most part, is based on land, right? It's the historical understanding of who, quote unquote, owned or possessed the land, right? And many times these are faith-based or peoples, communities that really separate God and earth from the land that they dwell on, right? That, again, that's the separation. God and earth, right, which is not ours,
right,
and the land that they dwell on, which they believe is theirs.
Right.
And so that sense of belonging is, this is mine, this is ours, because I belong to the group that owns it.
Right.
It can be, again, it can be owning the land, owning the idea, the ideal, the concept, and if not checked, and or if threatened, if there's a perceived or real threat, then it will bleed into some other acts of either terrorism or even war.
Right.
Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, profound. Thank you, Tommy. We want to thank our community for joining us this morning. Sandy Wheatley has joined us. Sandy is a Hall of Fame educator. She was president of the school board in the Dakota School District for years. She was a senior consultant with us and a phenomenal facilitator of conversations for decades. And she's still very active. She says those words of encouragement, or words of encouragement for many of us: no credible opponent to diversity, equity, inclusion, respect, love. And that's what you and I believe. That's the weapons that we choose to fight with, Tommy, which means that we are not against anybody on our good days.
Right.
And just like I said, on our bad days, man, we can go anywhere. So uh, and so I too want to keep monitoring myself, continuing to grow, never pointing fingers at others that are doing crazy things as though I'm not capable of that.
Yeah.
And so I think that all of us have to look at becoming what I talk about and call becoming diversity critical thinkers. The next factor that can escalate these conflicts is grievances and injustice, perceived grievances, real or imagined, such as economic disparities, discrimination, or historical injustices, can be catalysts for individual conflict and provide a basis for nationalist or extremist movements that ultimately result to violence. I think that there are some things that are occurring in the United States that are keeping sort of civil war at bay. We had more job growth this month than anticipated. The way that we are going is we are an older country, an older society, and we have more jobs than we have people right now. And so that's the thing that's going to stave some of this off. But people are beginning to look at this whole immigration thing through the lens of those thousands of people coming over here and freeloading off of us. So grievances around that. And then if there are some of them that are bringing drugs, and if there are some of them that commit acts of violence, it becomes easier to demonize all of them. And Tommy, it is complex, man. And I do understand that 10,000 people a day, 100,000 people a day in communities, man, that is not sustainable in no way. And so there's you've got to do something with that. But Tommy, when we're putting razor blades in bodies of water, these families, man, are trekking from countries from around the world trying to get to the promised land of the United States. And I was watching some children from Guatemala, I think, that were just talking about the kids, the bodies of kids that they saw littering along the way in their journey to get here. And Tommy, when I think about that, I cannot simply just look at that and demonize people that are trying to get here. By the same token, man, we just can't be filling up just so many buildings that we can't even take care of our own. And so it is complex, Tommy. What are your thoughts around these grievances and injustices, and how you responded to those?
I still think that we are at a critical intersection of the internal civil war that we as human beings are constantly experiencing. And that civil war, internal civil war, has to do with identity, has to do with that sense of belonging, maybe ownership, possibly power. We are fighting constantly, Eric, within ourselves. And I'm not talking about outside of ourselves right now. I'm talking about inside of ourselves. It may be a moral internal civil war, right? And we're at conflict. It is life itself. So the human experience is conflict.
Right.
And it's constant, constant. And then there's sometimes some fractions and explosions.
Right.
This is kind of at an intersection with the exterior or civil war opportunity.
Right.
That is where we have immigration, which is not new to this country or other countries. Right. Not all countries, but other countries do experience immigration, those who are not naturally born citizens of that country.
Right.
What I'm seeing more and more for this country, the United States, is that although over the last several years, maybe even a couple of decades, there's some spikes and lulls in that immigration population, that more recently, Eric, that there has been, for whatever reason and through whatever vehicles, this emphasis that immigration equates people coming from South America.
Yeah, that's the only one that we're fearful of.
Yep. And in reality, immigrants to this country are coming from the world.
Canada, everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere, right? They're coming from and through all of our borders,
Right.
east, west,
Right.
north,
You
and
cannot
south.
stop that.
And so the injustice is really, we have to go back to define what is justice. Yeah, what is justice?
Right.
And what is, for this country, its true creed?
Yeah.
Is it the land of the free? If it is the land of the free, and there are other peoples of this world who are oppressed and or not free, and they're trying to pursue freedom, would they not come to the promise that this motherland has offered to the world?
Right.
Actually, this country has subjugated other countries, said, no, you're not free. We'll put you under whatever regime or whatever. We are free. We are a democracy.
Right.
And now we're at a crossroads of, are we who we say we are? And are we living who we would like to be? The short answer is no, we're not. We're not who we say we are.
Right.
We're a hodgepodge of things. And so it is the grievances and injustices are abundant, and unfortunately they're increasing.
And it's easy to get us to play on our emotions and to get us engaged in this circus of incivility, no progress, no need for critical thinking, no need for real progress. You don't have to do any of that if you just play on people's emotions and you play on nationalism and fear. Those things drive a lot of passion. And Jim Jordan, the congressman from Ohio, who looks calm and sweet right now as he's trying to take over the chairmanship, of the Republican Party in Congress. He doesn't have a compromised bone in his body, and that's concerning to me, because it really just can create a level of intransigence in the name of champion conservative values. To be effective in Congress, you've got to compromise. Neither side really specializes in compromise at all, and they don't want their people to consider compromise, because they don't need an electorate that's educated, that's too nuanced in its thinking. If they're doing that, then you can't guarantee their vote. So you have to really bank on their vote, guarantee that by sort of keeping people polarized and demonizing the other side. And Tommy, that's just it's not helpful for us at all. So we're really at an intersection, a crossroad right here. I'd be surprised if the Republican Party is able to quickly come back from, losing their Speaker of the House. I don't see it, them coming back quickly. But pressure gets put on all of them to sort of keep them in line. And all of this heads us towards a country that doesn't recognize or buy into its Constitution. We talk about that, but Tommy, we're heading in a place where people are willing to sacrifice the Constitution and our form of government in order to get their own cultural and nationalist needs met. That's where we're headed. And that, to me, is concerning. Radicalization, propaganda, and manipulation, these are the factors that escalate us from individual conflict to radicalization of people on our sides, propaganda and manipulation, group dynamics, political factors, socioeconomic conditions. Tommy, how do we utilize, how is the work that you and I do related to trying to dismantle these building blocks of war?
Great question, Eric. And it's a it's an ongoing battle and challenge. The work that we do is kind of, is both from an organizational perspective, that organization, agency, institution, system, that is bigger than one individual person or a small group of people. And so when we look at systemically, the work that we are doing is trying to be critical of the system to offer up suggestions, recommendations, solutions to make the system work fairly for all.
Right.
When the system itself is discriminatory, it is overtly biased toward the inconsistent application of rules, regulations, etc. And the system basically works for a small minority and not the vast majority. Our work is to look at the system and ask the system itself, is this working?
Right.
Some people may say, yes, it is working because it's working for me.
Right.
Other people may say, no, not at all. I wish it would change to at least include me because I don't feel like I belong in the system. That's the macro level. Then we move into the micro level, the work that we do, because we can't always control the system. We can't always make a significant dent of positivity in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So we move closer toward the individual. And in our work, we can work with literally an individual, or we can work with a small group of individuals, 200, 300 people, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. And our work is to allow those people to see themselves as people in a system that will even continue after they are part of that agency, organization, institution. And so we have, at the same time, Eric, we're looking into the future, focusing and being present in the present, as well as not forgetting the past.
Right.
That's what we do.
Right.
Right. Now we're not harping on the past, but our work is, has anyone ever seen this before? What's this? Grievances, complaints, conflict. Like, no, I'm 60, 65. I've never seen anything like this. Really? You're
Right.
60, 65? However, I'll close with this, Eric. I make that statement because this is what I was going to say earlier, but I didn't say, but I'll say it now. So there are people that we know, I know particularly, who choose not to be involved with anything we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, the world.
Right.
I don't want to be involved with that.
Right.
I say to these people, you have the right to stop out.
Yeah.
Right. However, please consider that looking at history in the 20s, 30s, 50s, 60s, there were groups of people that said, I'm not going to participate.
That's right.
I'm not going to be involved with the process of change.
It's coming.
It's coming. I'm not going to complain. No grievance. I don't see injustice. In fact, I don't see the reality.
Right.
And wait for it. It's going to show up
at your doorstep.
At your doorstep. So it's going to be your doorstep or the next generation of your family's doorstep.
That's right.
It's going to show up. And do we want to leave this mess to the next generation?
Right. Because where we're going now, Tommy, just to be clear, for all of those that you said that don't want to have these conversations, that think this is all politicized, I'm not a political person. To look at Ukraine and Russia and think that it has nothing to do with us is foolish.
Yes.
Because it absolutely is coming our way. If Russia can do Ukraine, they'll do Poland and everybody else around that. And it's just like World War I and II.
Yep.
that we can't just sit over here in the West and feel like just let whatever happens over there, because there's evil people, Tommy, that don't ever want to stop at that over there. They actually are looking for world domination.
Sure.
And we're seeing right now the increase in use of nuclear weapons. That's what we're seeing right now. And because you got big boys and toys, people don't collect these things up for nothing, Tommy.
Yeah.
And I think that people are looking to see if they can get to jump on the U.S. and take out a half a city. That's where we're heading if we don't find a way. Because, Tommy, it looks to me in our politics that it's stupid games that people are playing at first. It's just an argument. It's just an angle. And I'm not really that serious about how evil those other people are. But I'm trying to win this debate. And before you know it, Tommy, we're believing that foolishness. And the way they've described the opposition is ridiculous. But now we're buying it because our fear is up. And before you know it, Tommy, we are literally back to nationalism, racism, race wars. And I just think that people act as though that's not feasible. It's not realistic. But it's happening right in front of us.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't believe that we would be this quickly looking at abandoning Ukraine, while at the same time, Tommy, I'm very aware that you can't keep supporting unending wars. It's difficult. And it becomes much more difficult if we're never having the conversation and working together to try to determine what's right.
Yeah, the argument is going to be very, very difficult in the next several weeks, months, and maybe a year, Eric. Here's why I think. There were some events this morning that were reported. It may have happened last evening, but we received it this morning. So those events happened based, in Israel, Gaza Strip, etc. And there's a long time history of the lands of that area and the peoples who are trying to vie for control.
Right.
There's a long history of the America's support of particular communities in those regions of the world.
Right.
It's very clear. Again, America's support of the people in the land. So when you look at Ukraine and Russia and America's support, that support is different than being in it, right?
Right.
America was in a war, Vietnam War. We were in that war that was almost never ending.
Right.
And at that time, folks were like, whoa, why are we here? Right? We've been here. Are we winning or losing? We're getting the newspaper. We're hearing what's on the news. We don't believe what we're hearing or reading. Talking about we're winning. And then I had a friend that came back there and said, no, we're not winning.
Yeah.
But that's what the news said.
Right.
No, we're far from it.
Right.
Right. And by the way,
guerrilla warfare, man. They intrigue.
It's guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
And so we as a whole, we're in a juxtaposition. Again, do we continue to support and a war that may not end anytime soon, but we're not in it. And now we have another firestorm to possibly support, if not be in a conflict that we have a higher vested interest in.
Yeah, that's what
all of this, Eric, is outside of America.
Yeah.
So literally, if you are in America and you say all that stuff outside, it doesn't pertain to me, I'm going to stop out. I'm just going to focus on paying my bills.
Right.
The chickens will come home to roost.
They're coming.
Evil and conflict that has been put out in the world will return in one way, shape, or form. That's what we're talking about. These factors that escalate us from the individual to the national. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
So
sometimes they're driven by individual leaders seeing themselves lose their grip on power. And so if they can initiate a war, then it ultimately drives greater nationalism and drives more people to your side and gives you more power. That's what we're taking baby steps toward right now. We're taking
Yes.
baby steps toward that. Because if I can demonize the other side big enough, my voice will be much more powerful. And it's fascinating to watch. As I watch former President Trump sort of yell about the judge and yell about all the attorney generals, as though, I mean, I just can't even imagine somebody of color thinking that they could do that about a judge who controls their destiny and
No way.
feel like they could do that. And I mean, and the more deaf we become to that, the more it becomes commonplace to see that. It creates a level of entitlement that is just shocking. Let's look at some of the practical things that individuals can do, Tommy, to sort of reduce individual conflicts that lead to cultural conflicts that lead to terrorism and stereotypes against whole groups of people. The first one is cultural sensitivity. Educate yourself about different cultures, traditions, and customs. Learn to appreciate and respect cultural diversity. This can help you avoid misunderstandings and conflicts based on ignorance or stereotypes. That's one of the things that I perpetually have to do, Tommy, because you can't listen to the rhetoric that gets to the airwaves. The things that get to the airwaves are the most extreme, the most sensationalized. And so, even if you look at the issue of transgenders, people in communities, they in general are not the same as the fringes about them are. And if the media gets its bills paid through sensationalism and the extremes, they lead us to a level of fear that drives that then underlies hatred and passionate discrimination. And so cultural sensitivity, understanding and learning about other communities can help to bring down the passion that aligns itself to fear.
I would add that in the process of cultural sensitivity, awareness, knowledge, and skill, Eric, I would say that proximity is important. In other words, to develop cultural sensitivity, I would not recommend talking to a person that does not understand that culture, right? And again, that may sound like
Common sense, but
common sense,
ain't
but
nobody operating with it
a lot of people get their information from people who are not part of that culture,
all
right?
day long.
And then secondly, if you do have some closer proximity to peoples of that culture, it's not one person that speaks of the whole culture.
Right.
And so that's important to say, well, I understand, what African Americans want because I spoke to Tommy. I spoke to two people. I spoke to Tommy and Eric. So I
Right.
know all things about Black people.
Right.
That's not being
Good luck with
culturally sensitive. And so it is a journey. There will be mistakes made, but the learning is in the mistakes.
Right.
Right? We can't be safe in learning about cultural sensitivity.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Again, let me repeat that. We cannot be safe in learning about cultural sensitivity. So if we're guarded and say, well, I want to understand that culture, and they say or do something about their culture that offends me,
Right.
I don't think that your culture should do that at all. That's offensive. It's their culture,
Right.
right? This is the food that we like. This is the style that we like to do. Why? Deion Sanders says, why does my confidence offend your insecurity?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Cultural sensitivity, that is that we are sensitive and aware and understanding of others' culture.
Tommy, the next one. So I just did this last week with our client, empathic listening or active listening.
Yeah.
And I was teaching this skill. And we had some scenarios that people had to sort of role play them out. And, a guy read another a scenario to another guy. And then he was supposed to sort of paraphrase what he said. He said, "I can't do that." I mean, it was like, I disagree so much with what you just read. This is a role play. I can't even do it in the role play. I said, well, tap out, the phone home, get a friend. But it's amazing, Tommy, that when we find ourselves in such rampant disagreement, a lot of times we can't even engage in empathic listening. And what I would say to people is that you'll never have empathy for people you don't know. So we've got to start by trying to build a relationship, because then and when we have a relationship, we increase the likelihood of us being open to giving empathy to people. Empathic listening is a set of skills. We describe it in 5 steps. Step 1 is really the active listening body posture, sort of this open body language. Step 2 is really beginning with a tentative opening. In other words, when you're seeking to paraphrase what someone has said, especially when you are in a place of cultural conflict, you don't see the thing the same way. You want to start with, let me see if I'm understanding what you're saying. Then step 3, you're sort of paraphrasing the message content of what they had to say, the ABCs, and then the feeling content. It sounds like you're frustrated or you're mad or you're angry. And if you get it wrong, they'll adjust. And then step 4 is really checking back for accuracy. Is that what you said? And then finally 5, how can I help or how can I support? And but I find that, Tommy, people are hesitant to develop this skill. And who would you say, Tommy, it is oftentimes most difficult for us to practice this skill with? People in our families or people at work?
Oh, great question, Eric. That's my first mind went to people in our families.
Yeah, I agree.
Active listening.
Yeah,
Because I want to throw in that emotion, that connection, right?
Yeah.
Folks at work at one point, we can have some cognizant dissonance.
Right.
I don't really need to know you that well or
Right.
whatever. We can just go transactional.
Right.
So yeah, it's those who are in closer proximity to us, particularly those who have deeper understanding and experience with us.
That's right. And our hot buttons and everything and all kind of beliefs about one another. So that can be difficult. But I think also what can be very difficult is if we have a long sort of years, decades, centuries of conflict and beliefs about you as a people group. I've got neighbors right now, man, that are so caught up and steeped in the cultural sort of conflicts of the Middle East that all they can do is stereotype groups of people in wild, angry, violent ways. Because when you put blood on top of these cultural conflicts, when you can look back to relatives and people that you know personally or in your family that have died for these conflicts, Tommy, how much more difficult does that make it for people to ever find a pathway to peace?
It makes it very difficult, particularly when, again, that knowledge or information is shared across generations. It makes it difficult. It's easy when that knowledge and or information is lost over the generations. And so your neighbors, not knowing their nationality or the cultural conflict, I don't know, and I don't need to know, but I can assume by way of what you're sharing about them is that there's some retained knowledge and information over the generations about that land or that space. African Americans in general, we have lost that information from that conflict.
Right.
right? We've lost it. That information has been watered down, has been propagandized to be wrong or incorrect, right? And now, in some cases, no one is listening. Again, that's an absolute, or we're not listening to ourselves with regards to what we like to call the historical biography,
Right.
right? And so it's difficult to remember what you don't know. Eric, it is. It's
Right.
difficult to remember what you don't know. It's
Right.
easier to remember what you do know, and if you're close to the information, then you get a little bit of dogmatic, but you hold true, like, and then pass judgment on others that, hey, here's my truth, which is the truth, and they are wrong. And so when we look at the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory, we go through the continuum of denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, and then adaptation. What you're talking about here is polarization.
Right.
And polarization is when we engage with differences, we simply judge it,
Right.
oftentimes as right or wrong, or us versus them. And that's what happens when we're not actively listening and learning from one another.
And I'll give you an example of what we do, and we are almost completely unaware of it. Is this whole new thing? The PGA just went through this thing with the Live Tour, and the Saudis have put all these hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into really trying to buy golf, take golf over. And Khashoggi, the journalist, Washington journalist that got killed and cut up. I mean, it was cruel what the Saudi leaders did to that man. And then we came up with this term that we love to throw out there around. We call it sports washing.
Ooh.
That they're literally looking to wash their reputation out through sports. That sounds so, oh, you can't let them do that. When they say it, it sounds like, oh, I know I love golf. Am I falling victim to my love of golf that I'm now going to have a better love and forget what they did? Tommy, that's been our whole story in the United States, is washing our history in order to make our founding fathers and others the story read like a fairy tale. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, I look at in the first millionaire in this country, a man who was ruthless, who really just made his millions off of beaver pelts. And then today, now he's got foundations named after him, streets named after him, buildings. And all we know is the great philanthropy that his family did. We washed all of the evilness of this man so that we could create a fairy tale. And so that's what's the sad part about this game, Tommy. And that's why you can never think of your side as holier than thou, or your argument as holier than thou. You constantly have to have the humility that says that even in the midst of this conflict, there are some elements of it that I'm wrong about. And until individuals are willing to accept that they are wrong in conflicts in some aspect of it, then we'll constantly be only looking at our side from an ego standpoint. And that's, I think, what leads to terrorist acts, nationalistic conflicts, and war.
Yeah. Yeah. Eric, and as we transition to the next point, challenging stereotypes. And sorry to jump ahead on you. You inspire me. There was an exercise that I did with a client this week called the silent interview.
Mm-hmm.
And so the silent interview, you have a couple of folks, a pair, maybe a triad, 3 people. You don't want to go too far beyond that. And there's a set of questions, a half a dozen questions, such as, what is your partner's favorite food? What type of music do they like to listen to? What are their hobbies? What do they like to do as a for recreation and hobbies. How many siblings do they have? So you have these set of questions, right? And the objective is for this silent interview to happen. You face your partner, or you turn to the right and face your partner. And without speaking, you answer these questions of your partner. And so, in other words, I would look at you, observe you, and I would answer the question, what is Eric's favorite music, type of music, genre of music? I'll write that down, right? The whole thing is assumptions and stereotypes.
Right.
And so I did the exercise, and folks started it very well. They weren't talking. Sometimes people want to say, go ahead and tell me the answer.
Right.
And then you circle back and you verbally ask the questions. And oftentimes folks are, they're way off. They're way off. I don't like that type of music at all.
Right.
Right. I do not have one other sibling. I have 7 other siblings.
Right.
Right. And I'm the youngest, right, at the age of 58. Right. What? Right. You're the young. How old is your brother? Well, my brother's 74.
Right.
Okay. So with that being said, it projects biases.
Right.
And what we were doing with the exercise with this particular client is the client had been working on a strategy to engage everyone in the system such that they have a sense of belonging, they're valued, and they're heard. Literally. Sense of belonging, they're valued, and they're heard. And we were creating a strategy from our lens, saying, here's exactly what our folks hear, or here's what they want to know, here's what they want to say. We went through this exercise, the silent interview, and I asked, have we talked to the people that we're trying to serve? And they said, well, we talked to a few, right? What's a few percentage wise? About 10%. Oh, we're making a plan, a decision for 10% of the group. You know, that's the minority.
Right.
There's 90% that very well may say, this is not what I want to say at all. This is not what I need at all. And so through challenging stereotypes, it leads to courageous conversations. It leads to more empathy. It leads to more understanding and cultural sensitivity. That's what challenging stereotypes does. Not only our stereotype about others, but even our own stereotypes about ourselves and our own culture, right? Because we have a thing called stereotype threat.
Right.
Yeah, hey, as a Black man, my stereotype is that I'm going to be loud and obnoxious or angry. And so I may, through stereotype threat, try to act the polar opposite of loud or angry. So when the cashier lady, the manager, and this lady is yelling at me,
right,
I have a civil war, Eric. Right? Do I raise up and be who I am, which is a Black man who has long history of being these things happening?
Right.
Or do I say, yes, I am a Black man, but I'm Eric Ellis, and I want to show up the way I want to show up in alignment with my faith, my being.
Right.
And so now you act out one way, get to the car. Yeah, that's not who I want to be.
Right.
Right. That's what it is. So I heard your story and heard it in me.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. And those are the things that we're up against, Tommy. And stay tuned. You and I will not want for a lack of work. But what I think, Tommy, what happens is that people have to also decide that they want harmony, that they want community. And people are not always sure that that's what they want. Because I didn't want harmony and community when I felt that I was facing an injustice. I wanted a pound of flesh. That's what my flesh wanted. And then later on, I thought about it and said that I allowed something outside of me to change my character into something that doesn't represent me. And so I think that in closing, Tommy, I think that we all have to look at what role do we play? How do we want to show up? And what is not just the best actions for the world, but what are also the best actions for me? Because as I got myself up, I felt life leaving me because I've gotten worked up. It's the reason why I don't let myself get worked up over folk. Like, okay, it's one thing that you yelling at me crazy, but if I internalize that, then I'm also then partnering with you for our collective demise. And that's
Yes.
the thought that that I'll leave our community with, is that as we look at what's happening in Israel and the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians, we have to look at ourselves and say, are there ways in which we're contributing to those things right here, even as we prepare for this presidential election in 2024? Are we going to let ourselves get sucked into this in a negative way that harms the community, but also harms us? Tommy, you got the final word.
Final word is going to be very brief. Thank you for the community for joining us again. Every Saturday morning, you all are faithful. You all bring energy, as well as really challenge us to think through all of the different dimensions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are diversity conversations, and we thank you for joining us. Until our next time, take care, be blessed, stay safe.
Bye now.